In this conversation panel, these 5 trailblazing professionals will present their upcoming titles and will then discuss the creation of Black-centered content, the increasing availability of diverse stories, and what representation of identities means across genres in book publishing. Caseen Gaines, moderator, is a pop culture expert and author. Caseen Gaines, When Broadway Was Black, who holds an M.A. from Rutgers University, focusing on racial representations in popular culture. Please welcome to the stage Carell Augustus, Eriq LaSalle, George Redmond, Ali Biko Sulaiman Kamanda, and Caseen Gaines.
Okay, thank you so much. We are so excited to be here. My name is Caseen Gaines. I am going to moderate. I am also the author of When Broadway Was Black, which is a story of the first all-Black Broadway musical, Shuffle Along, from 1921, which Langston Hughes credits with kickstarting the Harlem Renaissance. It was Josephine Baker's first professional credit. It was a phenomenal show with a phenomenal score from U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel, and a show that has been largely forgotten by history. And so this is a deep dive into the legacy of this show, the importance of this show, and also racial representation on Broadway. And I wanted to introduce everyone here. They're going to talk about their books. We are going to start with George Redmond and Ali Kamanda.
My name is George Redmond. Thank you all for being here. Myself and Ali, we wrote Black Boy, Black Boy. Celebrate the power of you. There you go, Ali. What we wanted to do here was kind of change the narrative for young Black boys. The thought was that the response that we got for them regarding their future was ballers and rappers, right? How can we get them off of this 2-track system when they don't know their history, when they don't know that there's other individuals that have been great doctors, engineers, and astronauts, right? The thought came from the movie of Hidden Figures and how important these women were, but why is it hidden? Why are we just now finding out about it? So the same thought was a thought for young Black boys who are struggling to read, struggling to find identity, and unfortunately finding themselves in precarious situations that it's hard for them to get out of. So this thought was if they knew their past, it would help shape their future. And so that was kind of the drive behind that. It came from Brown Bear, what do you see, right? And ironically, it kind of got dark. Right? Initially it was Black Boy, what do you see? I see institutional slavery. I see police brutality. And it was going very, as I call it, Ali, Jason Reynolds, like very different. And luckily Ali was like, what are we trying to do here? Right? And so he was the checks and balances to figure out, maybe let's not show what we think they see, which is nothing but ballers and rappers. Maybe let's show them what they don't see, perhaps so we can have some sort of change in what we want from them. And so
now he's going to get us in trouble with Mr. Jason Reynolds over here. Let's not say that he's always a dark one, but for us this was more focusing on representation. We say that a lot about its importance, right? And so we are targeting children because that's the building blocks, that's the future, and the whole idea is for them to be able to understand, or at least even for us as the adults, that there's something inspirational, there's something aspirational for a child to see themselves, in literature. So with that in mind, we wrote this as fathers, making sure that being fathers to 2 young boys, especially since this was conceived during the murder of Mr. George Floyd, it was our attempt to add something to the conversation in a way that we thought would give them some sort of armor because you can't really protect them from everything, but we wanted them to have some confidence as they walk through life. So ultimately, it's a message now to all black boys, about believing in your own capacity to do great things as we draw from the examples of great men who have come before us. So every single one of us here stands on the shoulders of giants. We've all heard that. But what makes everyone different, though, is that we all have choices to make in life. And so these men that we are celebrating made certain choices. And for us, it's to try to inspire that next generation, starting with our own children, to believe in that so that they make the right choices themselves and are bold enough to do so as they walk through life's path.
Great.
Very excited about this book. Very, very excited.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. And I want to make sure that everyone knows who you are. So I'm also going to share a little bit about you. So Ali is an award-winning filmmaker and social entrepreneur from Sierra Leone, West Africa. He runs Biko Studios, a cross-cultural film production company, and is the president of Salone Rising, a not-for-profit organization that provides microfinancing and mentoring resources to small business owners in rural Sierra Leone. And George formerly worked at the Buncombe County District Attorney's Office as the assistant DA. He now works for the Sheriff's Office and is an adjunct professor in South College's legal department. They are college friends as well.
Yes.
So next these are actually some spreads also that I wanted to show. We can go back to. That's great. So next I wanted to reintroduce you to Eriq LaSalle. He is an actor, director, producer, and author best known to worldwide television audiences for his portrayal of the commanding Dr. Peter Benton in the award-winning, critically acclaimed medical drama ER. He was raised in Hartford, Connecticut, and educated at Juilliard and NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Mr. LaSalle is the author of Laws of Depravity.
Okay. That's me. Yeah, I started writing about 10 years ago, and the concept was to create a franchise for ownership. So IP is king in no matter what profession. So there have been a lot of changes, obviously, in the entertainment industry. Now we have many more streamers. Before, if you grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s even, there were basically just 3 networks. And then in the 80s, Fox came along, and then it was 4 networks. And now there are hundreds with streaming. But the one thing that never changes is IP. And so the concept was creating a franchise that I just feel I've always encouraged people of color and women to have ownership. And I think that a lot of times people of color become great players and teammates, but we're not as well represented in the positions of coaching, of ownership. So this is a part of a series. So there'll be 4 to 5 books in the series. And then, of course, the big goal is to turn these 4 or 5 books into series or movies, but that would also be, controlled by the creator. Because a lot of times, when we see movies based on books, 7 to 8 out of 10 will say the book was so much better, because there's this whole process where someone creates a book, then they sell the rights, then the studio interprets it, then they get a director, and so there's always this degree of separation or multiple degrees of separation. And being an actor, director, and producer, I thought it would be really cool to sort of be there from the beginning all the way through, and that protecting that vision. So for me, that's what this represents. And the genesis of the story basically for the first book came from me reading an article about how all of Jesus's disciples were brutally murdered. And that was something that's not in the Bible, but biblical scholars, are definitely keyed into it. And if you Google how were Jesus's disciples killed, you'll see that like literally all of them, not 12, like 30. They were just like beheaded, hanged, crucified. And so when I read that article, I was like, wow, that would make a really cool, what if you had a modern day serial killer who was killing his victims in the same vein that Jesus' disciples were killed. I also draw off of my favorite movies, and one of my favorite movies is Seven, with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. And in that, Kevin Spacey, as the killer, was preaching a sermon through his kills, very brilliant. And so I borrow from all worlds. So that's the movie world. If I can grab that kind of tone, then with this thing that I found out about the disciples and how they were killed, I thought it would make a pretty cool franchise. And so that was the intro, and then the next book follows another case and follows another case. But that's pretty much the genesis behind everything. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. And to my right is Carell Augustus, an LA-based photographer whose career has taken him around the world to shoot some of the biggest stars on the planet. His celebrity clients have included Viola Davis, Beverly Johnson, Mariah Carey, Elizabeth Banks, Pierce Bronson, Meghan Markle, Serena Williams, Snoop, and many more. And he is the author of Black Hollywood. And if you can share a little bit about it.
Yes. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. So my book is basically essentially a what if. And
You don't need it.
all of it derived from me being a kid growing up in the 80s mainly, and the 90s, and watching all these great movies that with my family and myself, Dirty Dancing and The Goonies and Back to the Future, and sort of feeling like the extent of our experience was always going to be just watching these people have those experiences. And I never got the message that I was either going to get lost in the woods with my friends and then conquer at the end. I never got the sense that I was going to be able to watch a black girl be crowned prom queen, because I never saw that growing up. So this book stems from a lot of things I didn't see, and wanted to create a world of like what ifs if the lovely Vanessa Williams was casted to play Cleopatra in a movie, or Omari Hardrick as James Bond. These are the visions that I had, and when I approached particular people about photographing them in these spaces, they said, yeah, and nobody ever asked me why. Because I think we all have the experience of what if this were to happen, and why didn't it happen? And here's a sort of semi-correction on that space. So I'm very excited about it, and it's a lot more than where that came from.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Am I going back? No. Yes. All right. So as I make my way back here, I wanted to actually ask some questions and just have a little conversation here, particularly with George and Ali. One of the things that really strikes me about this book is how many of those hidden figures that you sort of referenced are worked into this picture book. And I'm curious as to how you went about selecting who is going to be in here, and if you have any particular favorites that are included in the book.
Kick it off.
You can kick it off.
All right. So the inspiration started with this young man. And for us, when we initially were drafting and coming up with ideas for names, we did fall into, and we don't want to call it a trap, but our natural instincts went to entertainers. So as we were drawing on that, we noticed, though, that there was nothing really deep about that and as interesting. So what turned out as a better opportunity then was for us to start looking for names that are not well known, because you get to understand that there is this entire canon of people that we just don't know about who have contributed to society, that we just don't know about. And when you can go and start to learn about that, I think it makes it more realistic for you to know that they are just regular people, They've just done amazing things. And so for us, that became the fun part, because as black men, even though we were now in our 40s, we were learning of new names. I had never heard of Arthur Mitchell or Emery Malik or Master Chief Goins. So it became that opportunity, I think, for us to then say, hey, if we're going to even educate our own young boys, what better way to do it with folks that we don't know either, so we're all learning together. So that became fun, to do. But we did leave a lot of names on the cutting room floor, Like for me, my father named me after Muhammad Ali, and he was one person I wanted to put in there. I don't know some of the ones that you were thinking of that didn't make it.
There's so many, right? You got Thurgood Marshall, you got Langston Hughes. We've only scraped the surface we couldn't write a 200, 300-page book, right? It's a children's book. We want to get them excited into reading, right? And the reason why we kind of did a sort of poem is that we feel like rhythm is a good way to understand and feel confident in reading, especially for young readers. So the way that we chose these is that each one kind of showed a characteristic that we liked. For example, William Goins, first Black Navy SEAL, was brave. We have Colin Kaepernick, and for us, we talked about that yesterday. He starts the book, which for a lot of people is very controversial, but for the youth, right, who dream of wanting to be in his spot, for him to sacrifice that is huge. Everyone's trying to get there. He voluntarily said, I'm out of there, right, and what that meant. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to find out other avenues for kids. You can be this and this, right? Yep. And it's weird when we had to find sort of the rhythm of the book and what names fit with certain rhythms of how we came across. For me, I'm
names
pretty
are easier, right?
Yeah, some
or
names,
rhyme scheme.
Yeah, some names are really easy. For me, I liked Elijah McCoy. So Ken Daly, we give big ups to, as the illustrator in this book. He's Canadian. As soon as we found that out, we were like, oh, who do we need to put in there? I had no clue the real McCoys came from Elijah McCoy, right? And him inventing this sort of part for the train, and it was so good what he did, when people try to copy it, they're like, no, I want the real McCoy. And thinking how that passed and hearing that term and never knowing where it came from. And it came from sort of an African-American sort of ordeal. And so that was one of for us, it was an education for us at age 45, 44. Learning that. And so it was a pleasure and a joy to try to research and figure out who we can put in there at that point.
The story is structured really as a father talking to his son and introducing his son to all of these figures. And I'm curious about why it was important to have this sort of transference of knowledge generationally be at the center of this story.
I think it's being fathers. So for me, I recently lost my dad, and you look at life differently all of a sudden, because now in having my own son, it's like ultimately you see that your life at some point will come to an end. So it was maybe not even in thinking of it at that moment, but now recognizing this was just that opportunity of passing something along, down to him. But it's a way to try to say, hey, look, young man, you have to believe in yourself, If there's any gift or message I can give you, it's the same thing my dad, gave me about that confidence. Being born in Sierra Leone in West Africa and then moving to the United States, I've gotten the chance to see different cultures, So I sort of feel like I'm a bridge in between that. And my way to get my son into his own journey in life is for him to sort of understand his history and know where he comes from, so he feels confident no matter what spaces he's in. And if he can do that, hopefully he can also bridge wherever, I would say, with whoever he's with, so that they can better understand who he is and get a better insight to his own life, and maybe be able to see him for the person he is, so that they can celebrate his own humanity, So it was just as a love letter, I would say then to our sons, just to be able to say, hey, daddy's seeing you, I love you, but I want you to just be proud of who you are, and go out into life confidently. So it's sort of, I think, on that plane.
Yeah, for me, I always kind of started because my dad always called the Papa was a Rolling Stone, right? He was here, he was there, he'd kind of come and go, and he wasn't as steady as my mom was, as the rock, right, that I had in my family. So I knew that in my life it was something that I needed to correct for my son, right? And I needed to be there, and I needed to be present and not substitute my presence for a present, right? And giving them a gift and making that be what they look forward to as opposed to looking forward to me. It made me feel, what was my purpose here, right? What can I leave here after I'm gone? And how that can relate to my son as to what he can live on with and contribute. And so giving that note to our fathers, and Ali's dad was very integral with us in college and meeting with us. And so having that as a drawback as to an inspiration in drawing figures in this was something I think that was dear to us, how we want to translate. Not all boys, black boys, are going to have fathers in the picture, and I think that's something that we know, and that's probably part of the problem of where they're at and finding their value and their worth. Doesn't mean that they still can't find it, right? It just means at that point that there are lessons to be learned based on the history of what came before them.
Great, thank you.
You son, there you go.
Eriq, I wanted to ask, because your book is a thriller, your series is a thriller. And when I think about thriller writers, I don't often think about people of color in that space. And so I'm curious about how you approach, or what interests you in the genre of thrillers in terms of being a person of color, writing about law enforcement in New York City. What perspective do you bring to your story?
Well, I started, I think the attraction to thrillers back in the late 90s. I produced and starred in a television movie that was based on the author John Sanford, who has a great character by the name of Lucas Davenport. And so, of course, Lucas Davenport wasn't written black, but, ER was hot, so they were like, hey, you want to do this? I was like, sure, So when I did it, tonally, I obviously started reading a little bit more thrillers, but tonally, I lean more towards drama to begin with as an actor. And I like suspense. I like engagement. I think I have a short attention span, so I think like the sense of suspense keeps me engaged. And so when I started writing, I just naturally gravitated towards that genre. It wasn't until you start writing that you realize there's not a lot of representation, there's not a lot of frame of references to go to and say, hey, how did this person do it? Will that, can I gain some insight? Can I get some education? Like I say, I learned from John Sanford. Don Winslow doesn't do thriller, but he does some really heavy action drama. And so I didn't have a whole lot of, Walter Mosley, who is, amazing, but he's more of that. It's still a different style. There's a new writer on the scene that's been on the scene for the last 5 years that's killing it right now, S.A. Cosby, and it's a brother out of Virginia. And again, not necessarily in the thriller genre, but close to thriller adjacent. His stuff is very suspense. He's suspense, very suspenseful, very cool. So obviously you don't want to be a part of. If you don't have an example, I think at some point you have to create an example or be the example. Gandhi, Barack, Martin, everyone says, be the change that you want to see. Well, sometimes, creatively, we have to be that. Sometimes I think For instance, you think about what Me Too did for the empowerment of women who had all of this talent, who had all of this stuff, but it was locked, and then all of a sudden there was this freeing of it. And so you never know when society will help dictate that need, because it doesn't normally do that for people of color. It doesn't normally do that for women. It doesn't but you just stay on that road of trying to make change, but being true to, first and foremost, it has to be good. And so a lot of times people will talk about change, people will talk about being pioneers, but the base material is not great. The base execution is not great. Whether it's movies, I don't gravitate. I don't go see every film. I don't like every quote unquote black film. I don't like every quote unquote white film. I don't, but there's always like this responsibility, like when something black comes out, we're supposed to, and you go, yeah, that's not good, though, So what if that particular one is not good? Just as not all Jewish films are going to be great, not all Latin films are going to be great, not all, So but it's our responsibility, no matter whatever genre the four of us represent, whatever style, whatever our lesson, whatever our goal is, it has to be good at the end of the day. It has to be, it can be a noble effort, but it has to be the best. And I think, one advantage of being raised, by a black mama was, she taught me, being a black boy, that you're going to have to run faster, you're going to have to jump higher, you're going to have to run longer. And so when you grow up developing those muscles, you bring it to everything that you do. It becomes second nature. And so I always knew I'm going to have to. I write and create out of necessity for longevity. When I look at, if I just remained an actor before I became a director and a producer, that's all in some ways out of strategic necessity, because you get to a point where you're no longer in fashion if you only have that one thing, and then you sit around and become a bitter actor because all of a sudden now the parts aren't coming, now you're past that. So I'm like, well, I'm always interested in how do I create the power. And so I think ultimately that's what we all do. I think the one big thing that we all have in common is that we are here as a response to what we've all viewed as a void, and we've just decided to step in the void of seeing black representation in Hollywood, the void of seeing diverse voices in this thriller genre, the void of seeing representation for young black boys that's going to make them feel empowered. So we see these as voids, and we all came and approached it very differently, and all of a sudden that those individual journeys have now sort of become this collective journey. And I think that's something that I don't think either one of us takes lightly, and I think we're all proud to get in and do our best to do it. Not standing on a soapbox and saying, "Hey, let's do the work and let's make it interesting." So anyway, so that's how I got into it.
Yeah, I wanted to share a story that you don't know. Don't be scared. Just trust me. So I ran into Eriq earlier today when I was eating some breakfast. And the hostess at the restaurant got a picture with Eriq. But what Eriq didn't hear was when he left, one of her coworkers said, "Oh, who was that? He looks familiar." And she said, "He was my doctor," is what she said. And I was reminded, we talked about this yesterday, but what happened this morning reminded me of the power of images. Right. And for a lot of people, you have played roles that have been the first time someone has seen a black doctor. and certainly for as long as you were able to be on the screen doing that. And I'm just curious about if you feel any sort of different level of responsibility when you take a role like that. Do you approach it like any other role, or do you feel like when you're stepping into a role where you know there is that void, that there are people like the hostess at that restaurant who are watching you, and does that make you respond differently?
Well, I think this. I'm proud to be an artist. I'm proud to be a storyteller. I try to show up no matter what form of storytelling I'm doing with a certain amount of pride. I think that in the mid-90s when ER came along, we weren't used to seeing an African American in a leading role on a network show playing that type of character. The year or 2 years before me, Blair Underwood was playing a successful lawyer on LA Law. And so he's a friend of mine, he's a peer of mine, but that gave me something before ER, that gave me something to look up to, so I understand when you're in that position, there's a responsibility. But I think, for me, I try to think even bigger than that. I think my I don't take anything away from that impact and that woman's experience. I'm proud of those. But I think as far as impact for me, it's when I became a director and a producer. Because I understood something as an actor. When I work, when I'm cast, maybe 3 other black people work. A wife, a couple of kids. Because if the role required that. When I work as a director, then that goes further. So now we're talking crew, we're talking people in front of the camera, behind the camera. When I'm a producer, when I work as a producer, that really means a lot. And like one of the proudest things is I was executive producer of Chicago PD. And without thinking about it, and this was the beauty of it, without thinking about it, I hired all of the directors and I directed a lot of the episodes. When I got to the end of the season, I realized out of 22 episodes on a network show, not BET, not one, on a network show, out of 22 episodes, 18 of those episodes were directed by women and people of color. That's the power. So, unless you're Will Smith, Tom Cruise, I mean, there's a elite group of actors that have that, or similar power. But when you're a producer, when you're a director, that means I'm hiring all types of one of the young brothers that used to work on my show, who everyone loved. His aunt is here working and just introduced herself to me. And that's power, because I'm like, yes, I remember talking to him and guiding him and giving him that insight, because we want that to spread. So I feel my real impact is director, producer, actor, cool. And like I said, that image and that thing that she had, that's hers. And I love that. And that's the power of being able to see us. But I also work on a higher thing of being able to help people start their directing careers, because then it spreads. And then one other last impactful thing for me, there was a young African-American female director that I worked with on a Stephen Bochco show. So we were both directing episodes, and she and I bonded. And so when I became an executive producer of Chicago PD, I called her and hired her as a director. She became one of our favorite directors. So I would give her multiple episodes. She was one of the directors when I was saying all of. She is now the executive producer of Chicago Med. So that's how it spreads, and that's the power.
Awesome, thank you. And so, speaking of the importance of images, Carell, your book is so striking to me because I've seen every image in your book before. I've just never seen it like that.
Yeah, I used to say, see Hollywood again for the first time.
Yeah. And it's remarkable. And I'm just curious, you mentioned that when you reached out to people, everyone got it.
Yeah.
But is there any image in the book in particular where your subject was particularly excited to be stepping into that particular role or shot that you were putting them in?
Yeah, I thought that, people like Vivica Fox and Vanessa Williams and Shamar Moore, who are these lifelong actors, I thought, they're not going to be impressed by what I do, but I got pulled to the side multiple times to be told, nobody has ever asked me to do an individual creative shoot. I'm always in a cast where we shot against a white background and I'm cut out and thrown in an ensemble situation. But to be pulled as an individual and walk into your own set that's just for you, more than maybe 4 of them said, I've never had this experience, and some pretty popular ones. So what that also said to me is editorially, magazines or, TV shows aren't giving them that space to be creative. Yes, they could be in a cast of people and they'll be up against a white background and we'll see the title on top and 6 people in the middle. But there's not going to be a spread in any magazine where, you see Vanessa Williams as Cleopatra. Vanity Fair, I don't know if they still do it, but every year that the Oscars came out, would go and recreate iconic scenes from movies with white actors. And I used to flip through that and just, everything was beautiful, but looking for black people, and I just never saw it. And for me, that was a void, and it didn't make sense to me. And I thought it would be more impactful sometimes with black talent. And that's when I decided to, just flip it upside down and cast my own people in some of these shots. So everybody was pretty excited and just intrigued by the idea and just waited around for me to shoot and put it together, and now it's here, so it's good.
Can you talk a little bit about the process? Because I know this book had a long gestation process. So can you talk a little bit about how you started down this path and what it was like during the process of assembling these wonderful subjects and collecting these images?
Yeah, so the timing, anytime somebody said yes, between them saying yes and walking into a studio where I was on average 6 months. So on average, you ask somebody in January if they could shoot, and they say, yeah, I can shoot. And then we go back and forth for months and months and months until it could happen. June, July, I would finally get them, and we walked them into the studio space. And so the process was, once I sort of understood that's how it was going to go for most of them, I just made sure that when I was ready to shoot, and they were ready to shoot, we just made it happen as a unit. But I tried, because I was trying to do one person at a time, but when I discovered it was going to go like that, I had to sort of start to get multiple people so that by the time I was done shooting one, in a month and a half I could shoot her, and then 2 weeks later I could shoot him, and on a couple occasions I had 2 people a day. So there was 2 times where I shot 2 talents on the same day.
Okay.
Of course, without them knowing, but you have to do what you have to do to make these shots happen, and each shot was literally like the perfect storm, because I made the tragic mistake of saying, oh, can we push it a week? And they said yes, and then I could never get them back. So I said, once they say yes and give you a day, you make it happen that day. So there was a huge discovery process across the board doing this, and once I adjusted to all of the people I had to go through to shoot people, and the hair and the makeup and the wardrobe and the studio and the assistants and the lighting, it was just about focusing to make each shot happen and giving yourself completely to each shot, because they're giving me their likeness, they believe in the idea, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't disappoint anybody or have anybody feel like they'd wasted their time. So it was just a great, phenomenal process. The ups and downs, the long days, it was just worth it. It was worth it, and I'm very excited about the finished product. Yeah.
There's like a thesis to this book, I feel like. When you thumb through it, there's a message that is not necessarily spoken. In some cases it is, because you have the subjects do have the opportunity to respond to
Yes.
their images, which
Yes.
is a cool feature. But I guess I'm curious, what do you want people to take away from Black Hollywood when they look through this book?
Yeah, so what I have found is that most black art has to be explained, and I really didn't understand that. Like, it has to come with a disclaimer or an explanation to make somebody somewhere feel comfortable. And, you know, I'm the type of person that will have a discussion about it with anybody, any given time, on whatever subject. But it's also a piece of work where you can just enjoy the art and not have a discussion. Because some of these images, which are based on mostly fictional characters, are the figment of someone's imagination, just like this book is for me. But people grew up with these images and they mean certain things to certain people. And now I come along and I, you know, make Holly Golightly a black girl. They want to talk about it, and we can talk about it, but it's art. And we don't have to talk about it. We could just say it's a great picture, or I don't really like it, or whatever the case may be. But people I found want to have discussions, and once you do, and if it's a genuine inquiry, they tend to really sort of understand it and get it. It's almost like people want permission to like it and love it. I'm like, you can love it. It's okay. And so that experience has been great as well, because I can talk about it for dear life. Yeah.
You know, we're talking about inclusivity in entertainment. I want to make some space in case people have questions, but yeah. I did want to ask if we can just go down the line with any examples, or who was someone that really was a beacon for you, whether it's in writing, whether it's on TV. Who was someone that was a figure that you looked up to and was aspirational when you were young? Someone of color.
Ooh. I'm gonna pass and you go first on that one.
So mine would be Pele. I grew up loving soccer, and so ironically, that's who I had a poster of in my room, in honor to him, because I think he just recently has passed away. But that, for me, as a young boy growing up, and soccer wasn't that big for African Americans at that time, but to see him and see what he's done, for me, that gave me the inspiration to try to be my best.
I'll take it. I'll be honest, and I'll have to say this. It was my sister in growing up. And I think for me, it was always because she was the firstborn, all right? So she got to go through experiences before I did. And maybe I never quite fully understood that, but it wasn't until I got into UNC Chapel Hill that I think for the first time, it started to dawn on me that all of a sudden these things were possible, because she was doing it. But I remember explicitly being very scared of leaving home to go do something, but I knew that she had done it, you know? And till this day, she's doing amazing things to where I think it just helps me also believe that I can too. So it's a lot more closer to home for me. So it's definitely been her. Yeah, nobody like famous or anything. Yeah. I'm gonna go with my sister.
Like I said last night, for me it was Sidney Poitier. That was, you know, we talk about the power of images. We talk about the power of being seen and being able to relate. And, you know, this was a man who personified dignity. And that was a big thing. And that was something that was, I think, collectively lacking for us as an audience in the 60s, 70s, even 80s. And, you know, there was, you know, all the prostitutes and drug dealers and pimps and all that you wanted to see, but to really be someone that was more aspirational in this sense of dignity. And then, you know, James Earl Jones. At that point, then it was just like seeing black faces. And that was like for me, and the whole acting thing was so. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. We had no frame. There was no frame of reference. So that was, you know, I mean, it was such an impossible dream. But when I would see Sydney in the heat of the night, and you just, oh man, you're just like, woo, I want, you know what I mean? And so it just, I think that definitely was something that helped mold me. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was Muhammad Ali to this day. I love that man. I tried to meet him before his passing, but just what he did to light a fire during a time when lighting fires in young black kids was not popular. It was seen as a threat, and he just made black kids they felt they could be smart, loved, tough, intelligent, and just what he did for black people in general, coming up in the 50s and the 60s, and the things he had to face, and just how, the black community looked at him as a whole. And even going back in my late teens, just watching documentaries and hearing him speak, and he was so likable to everybody. He actually defined race. And just now, sometimes I'll listen at some things he says, and it's so clear, and it's so poignant, and it's so direct, and it makes so much sense that I'm like, how could you be in the presence of Muhammad Ali and not want to serve him? And when you think back on that, do you now see what you missed out on? And for me, it was I just love hearing his voice. I love hearing the way he inspires people at the time and still. So he just always made me feel like I can do and be anything I wanted to be at any given time. And anytime I'm feeling a little bit down and out or not so sure about something or insecure, I just pop on some of his interviews where the person interviewing him is, they're getting a laugh out of what he's saying because he's true. And he just had conviction behind it. And I get the sense and I see that he believed it. And he wanted me to believe it because he knew that I would hear it one day. So he definitely is somebody that I just always look to and for inspiration. Yeah.
I wanted to invite people. There are 2 microphones here. I assume that they are for you. So if you would like to ask a question, you can come down. Don't be shy.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be the brave one and start. This is first time I'm ever asking a question at a national conference, and I'm really starstruck, so give me a minute.
We'll look away.
Thank you. So you are in a space full of librarians, school librarians, public librarians, academic librarians, and you know that across the country we are on the front lines fighting with censors. I have colleagues who have been reported to police as pedophiles. I have colleagues who have received life threats. I have colleagues who retired early. I have colleagues who had to go on medical leave because they were being harassed by parents and community members so much. And as much as we are doing our very best to fight censors, we are getting to the point when we are very tired and scared, and we are starting to self-censor ourselves. So we are making very difficult decisions. Am I going to be brave enough to put one of these books in my collection? Or am I going to make a decision to not to do it so the censors are not going to go after me? So you as authors, what can you tell us? How can we just keep going? Thank you.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Go.
Sorry, I want to address that for a moment because in addition to being a writer, I'm a 9th grade English teacher in a public school in New Jersey. And we see what's happening nationally around issues of critical race theory, issues of which books are in classrooms and libraries and things like that. And I think we have a responsibility as storytellers, and that includes librarians as storytellers too, that are talking up books and finding out what people are interested in, to tell the truth. Because I think that's what is inside of all of us. I think that's what brings us to books and to story. And I'm very proud to say that 2 weeks ago, I was recognized by the New Jersey Education Association for work in equity in education, largely because as things have gotten tougher, I have just ran further in that direction, because you need people to run in that direction. In the same way, like Carell was talking about Muhammad Ali, there may not be everyone, but if every library in your county had just one person who was stocking all of these books, someone's going to find it, someone's going to read it, and someone's life is going to be better for it, and they can't get us all. So I really think that's an important thing, because these books are so incredibly important. And I see on a daily basis kids that say, you know, my life has been changed by reading I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. Like there are all these different books that are so important to individual kids and individual people. So
Couldn't help myself, have to acknowledge I'm from New Jersey as well, so thank you.
there you go, buddy. All right, thank you.
They make them tough.
I think
in
the
Jersey.
one thing I wanted to add to that is, you know, librarians, you guys have this unique, powerful position. And I think, you know, sometimes we start off something and say, well, I do this because I love books. I do this because well, society has changed, policy has changed, politics has changed, the zeitgeist has changed. Therefore, some of you guys are going to be reluctant warriors, reluctant heroes. You might not have signed up to be heroes, but now because society will dictate that you guys take stands, society will dictate your what started off as a passion now has turned into a crusade. And some will, and no judgment, some will volunteer to opt out of that crusade. Librarians, you know, we honor you guys because of the power you have. Also, the thing I love about librarians is that, you know, we talked about this last night a little bit. We have the gatekeepers, the publishing world. They block so much. They can't relate to a lot of, you know, I wrote my book 10 years ago. Could not get a publisher at all, multiple times. So there are these gatekeepers. I think librarians become something beyond the gatekeepers. And I think it's a tough position that you guys are in. And you have to decide, I'm going to accept my role. I'm going to accept some of the challenges of this role. But what you need to hear, and everyone on this stage will say, we see you, we appreciate you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there are children who might not be able to articulate that. There are children that will be influenced by some of your decisions that won't recognize until 20 years later, 30, 40 years later, when they're running for president, when some young girl is running for president and winning because a seed was planted, that she read a book that maybe she wasn't supposed to read. And so you guys have that power. And so we can't fight that fight with you every day. All we can do is right now in these instances know that we as artists see you, truly appreciate you. And that's something, I hope it means something, but you know, when you're hungry, I hope it feeds you.
I just want to chime in on that for a second. So I sat in school for 12 years and college learning American history and was completely deprived of all kinds of things that I didn't know took place until after I started my own journey of reading my own books because they didn't teach it in school. I don't think the books were banned, if we're all being honest with ourselves, this whole movement, I don't even know what to call it or what it is the reaction and the response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Because people started to feel like their kids, the white kids that were out there marching for Black lives, were being indoctrinated somehow. And this is sort of their way to say, okay, the parents, you don't really have to care about that to that extent. And the pushback on that movement is what we're all experiencing now, because I've never before this heard of books being banned in any capacity. So I applaud all librarians. I thank you all. I know it can't be tough, but like Mr. LaSalle just said, we're there fighting the fight with you in silence, and if I could be there Monday morning with you, I would be. But I'm there in spirit, so thank you so much, and I appreciate your bravery. So thank you.
I'm gonna have Carell teach my Monday morning class.
I'll be there.
Yes, please, thank you.
First, I want to just say thank you. As authors, you created something and you sent it out into the world, and it's going to make a difference in someone's life. I'm going to tell you now, because I work with teenagers at a predominantly Black library, public library, and they read your books. They see themselves. But I guess my question is, you all talked about filling gaps that you saw. In my teen writing group, they ask all the time, like, what story hasn't been written? Like, they want these writing prompts. So I guess I asked you, what gaps do you still see? What gaps do you want to see filled, whether by yourself or someone else?
For me, to be honest, I would say it's an opportunity for them to maybe find that voice for themselves and fill that. You know, maybe they get to create their own stories too, because that's the new power that we all seem to have. And piggybacking off what everybody's saying up here, I mean, as librarians, you guys are part of the league of gatekeepers, to be quite honest. You're also change makers, you know. You're spending the most time with our children, and even as they're growing older, you know, and what you're intentional about putting in front of them does help them to change their lives, you know. But what I see happening right now is just a great opportunity, because we're all born creatives. And I just think if anyone is out there searching for something and they feel that there is a void, it would be to ask, what do you think is missing, you know? And then fill it. Like, tell your own story. Just find a way to find that voice and just write it out and just share it, you know? And I think that can solve some of those problems too, but it also gives them as an outlet, and also to find a voice of how they can create and share, you know? But that's my own small take. I'm not sure if anybody else has something to add to that.
Well, I think Gap, I think we represent Gap, and I think particularly Carell, I think meaning the Gap sometimes isn't what story, the Gap is what point of view. That's what's been missing. So listen, guys, there are Westerns, there are all types of movies, there are all types of stories. What we're saying is that we haven't, there's America particularly has deprived itself of, what about a point of view? I want to hear this little Asian girl's point of view about race. I know what I feel about race as a black man. I like to hear points of views from people that's so different. So the publishing world as gatekeepers has said, oh, whoa, we only going to let these point of views, and then when you come in as a person of color, we're going to put you in a category, and that's going to be ghetto lit, that's going to be urban lit. They're going to start creating all these. It's like the same thing with music. It's just like, oh my God, this R&B, this, but it can't be this. So there's all this separation. So it's point of view for me. And I think that, for instance, I think Black Hollywood, I think represents, I think that's sort of a microcosm of this whole thing, is that he's saying, hey, we've seen these images, and these images work. We've seen these movies, and we fell in love with these movies, despite the fact that we weren't represented. We grew up falling in love. We wanted to do that. I mean, Spike Lee became huge because he showed black sexuality at a time when black sexuality, you were either raping or there was no sexual, there was nothing in between. He came in and said, there's a point of view of in between. I fought for love stories on ER because I was like, black people go on dates. Black people know how to romance. They weren't writing that for me with with black women until I started protesting. When I started doing a storyline, when I had an interracial love story, they started having my character take her on dates, and I was going, why didn't I take black women on dates? They don't understand. Sometimes we just want we just want to put in our point of view. And then sometimes, yes, there are great original stories to be told, but I think the biggest thing is point of view. And I think, like, for me, that's like Black Hollywood. The book represents, like, let's take this iconic image. And I mean, Elizabeth Taylor, Cleopatra, yeah, okay. John Wayne as Genghis Khan. There was sometimes just these offensive, Fu Manchu. I mean, there was all these offensive images, and they wouldn't even tap into. And now we're seeing more of tapping into just point of view. So sorry about that.
Well, just to speak on that, Mr. Augustus, that's a story that I tell my kids all the time from my personal experience.
Yes, ma'am.
As an English major, I had a professor who, first day of class, he's like, we're reading the greats, and none of them were black authors or black characters. So I've made it my personal mission to kind of mess with this man. Every book, I was like, but what if he was black?
Yes.
We did The Great Gatsby, and I was like, but what if he was actually a man of color disguising himself, trying to pass as white? Wouldn't that story makes more sense that way? And he would get so mad. He's like, you make every character black. And I'm like,
yeah.
I tell my kids that all the time, like, and that's why I plan on getting your book for my collection. I'm like, well, okay, take a story, take Superman, take Batman. What if he was black?
So thank you for that. I just want to chime in on what you asked originally. So this is cultural as well. If I was Asian, it would be the Hate Asian Hollywood Project. If I was Latin, and then people go, well, you should do that. I said, I can't. It's cultural. You need to know and understand the culture of the people that you're representing. And to go back to what Mr. LaSalle said about what story your kids are going to write is their own and the way they see it. And I think that's a phenomenal place to start. That's the most unique and the best place to start their journey in. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you. Yes. So we're going to do a little lightning round, real quick. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, my name is Joe, and I just appreciate what you guys are saying, what you're doing. I spoke to Ali over there earlier today.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the conversation and the great things you're doing. But when you talk about a gap, and I see a gap, I'm passionate about it. I wrote a book about it, and some of the problem. But there's a big gap in the black community. When you start talking, I don't know if just the stage to do it. Believe me, I wasn't prepared to say anything at this situation here, but there's a big gap when you started talking theology, or you start talking theology. I can talk in the black community and stuff, and I can mention terms like free grace, or I can mention a term like lordship, salvation, something. And in the black community, we are so far behind on theology and Christianity, I would say. But you know that and theology is the greatest study there is. We call it the queen of science. And all the stuff that you're talking about, all the stuff is good. And it's good to experience, and it's good for your eulogy and all that other stuff. But nothing changed one destiny eternally, and has the power to change a person even in this everyday personal life and character and who he is and who he should be and can be, as theology. And I see where the black community is so far behind. We already be behind. Remember, our people start from can't read to what the white man said. And there's so much of stuff about how the white man used the Bible to beat down the black community. There's a lot of hatred and a lot of hurt. There's a lot of history, but there's a lot of stuff that is not accurate, and a lot of stuff that need to be understood better. I wish that you guys with this opportunity and this ability and all this talent, I wish we could get where let's do something that is much more beneficial to society, the world. Let's take on a true understanding of Christianity and the gospel, and because the truth.
Well, I have to. Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, but I think this. When we talk about inclusivity, there's always there's a trap, everything, we talked about this last night, we were joking. Chris Rock said, black people don't always think just about black stuff, and so there's an opportunity for us to, when we come together, I don't want to be up here always, it's not just about black, it's not just about what one person believes spiritually. Inclusivity for me, as long as we respect each other, and this goes against what I'm a spiritual person. I don't consider myself a religious person, and I base myself on sort of the Christian tenets. But the point is this: if there's someone here that does not believe in God the way I believe in God, I don't care. I'm not trying. We're not here to force someone to believe the way I get along with. I don't care what you are, Muslim, Buddhist, non-believer. To me, it's how we treat. And so when we talk about inclusivity, it has to be from that point of view, not just about race, not just about gender, but about ideology, about theology, about a lack of theology. And so
accuracy.
Accuracy. So I just wanted to say that. So anyway.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you. This is going to be our last one. I know we're a little bit over.
And I'm going to be quick.
You're good.
Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Knowles. I'm the author of Kids Grieve Too. I wrote a grief book for kids. It won a proclamation from the mayor, a resolution from the state of Texas, and a Shark Tank to start a foundation for grieving kids. And I sit back there and listen to you guys. And one thing I want to know is, how do I get all 4 of those books? Because I'm donating them to the Impact Leadership Academy in Houston, Texas, where my grandson goes to school.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Clap for that.
It's an all-boys school in Houston, Texas, and this is their first year of existence, and that's my grandma's gift to them.
Oh.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your book, and it sounds incredibly important, so thank you for writing it. The Source Books booth is, if everyone just looks that away, I can see it. It's right there.
Right there.
I can give you the number of the booth, but it's just right there.
Right near the 560.
531, I believe it is.
Okay.
Is that right? So right after, we're going to be heading over, actually pretty much right now, we're going to be heading over there. All of our books are there. Please come and join us, see us, pick up our books. If you want us to do events, please, we can get cards and we can set that up with Source Books. But we would be more than happy to continue the conversation. All right? Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the question. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.